The hum of the intergalactic transport ship was steady, but to Jack it was like a distant buzz that he could barely hear anymore. He was too preoccupied with the task ahead of him. It wasn't just any task, it was a chance to prove humanity's worth to the wider galaxy. And if there was one thing Jack knew, it was that humans had been underestimated. No one had seen what they were truly capable of. He sat in his seat, adjusting his uniform, the tight-fitting fabric of the Federation Academy's standard attire feeling unfamiliar against his skin. As a soldier, he was used to wearing practical gear, something that could withstand the roughest of environments. But today was different. Today he wasn't just a soldier, he was a representative of Earth, of humanity. He had to convince the galaxy that humans were worthy of their place in the stars. The ship began to decelerate as it approached the orbital station, a floating nexus that connected species from across the galaxy. Jack looked out the viewport. The shimmering, immense structure of the Federation Academy stretched out before him, its towering spires and radiant blue energy fields giving it the appearance of something both grand and intimidating. Humans had never been in the Academy's spotlight, and today would mark their first entrance into this prestigious institution. Though Jack had spent most of his life on Earth and was familiar with the human struggle, the dangerous creatures, and the unpredictable landscapes, he couldn't deny the weight of the occasion. He had never expected to find himself standing in the halls of an academy shared by the brightest minds from across the galaxy. He was just a man from Earth. But he knew that humans were more than the sum of their parts. He was determined to prove it. When the ship docked, Jack stepped out, his boots landing on the metallic surface of the station with a soft thud. As he made his way toward the Academy's entrance, he was met with the sight of various alien species walking alongside him. Some towering and armored, others floating with grace, and yet others in shapes he couldn't quite comprehend. The variety of beings around him was overwhelming, and Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of awe mixed with anxiety. To be a part of this world, to step into a place like this, it was unreal. He was escorted to the classroom, where the Federation's annual course on interstellar diplomacy and galactic history was being held. As he walked through the hallway, the murmurs of alien students reverberated in the air, their conversations in languages Jack could barely understand. When they turned to look at him, he met their gaze with a quiet confidence. The other humans were already seated inside. The classroom was circular, with a holographic display in the center that projected a 3D map of the galaxy, showing the various alliances, empires, and independent systems that made up the known universe. The walls were covered with digital screens flashing data, planetary statistics, star systems, and diagrams of intergalactic trade routes. But it was the students seated around the room that caught Jack's attention. They were unlike anything he had ever seen. There were Xarnothians, tall and armored with natural exoskeletons, their features sharp and imposing. Zilfrans floated in their translucent bodies, with multiple arms extending out from their central forms. And then there were the other species, many of which Jack couldn't even name. They all stared at him as he entered, their eyes filled with curiosity, judgment, and perhaps even disbelief. To them, humans were an anomaly, newcomers to the Federation. They had no idea what to make of them. Most of the galaxy had written Earth off as a soft world, a dangerous and primitive planet that was better suited to isolation. It wasn't that the aliens didn't respect humanity's technological achievements. It was that they viewed Earth's creatures as weak, its environment far too dangerous to be considered civilized. Zelkra, the Xarnothian instructor, was the first to speak, his voice deep and resonant, reverberating through the room. Welcome, human. We begin our course today with a discussion on galactic history, the dynamics of power, and the evolution of species. We shall see if you can keep up with the lessons. Zelkra's posture was straight, his body framed by a series of sharp angles as his exoskeleton reflected the light. He had the air of someone who had seen wars, both political and physical, and who had emerged victorious every time. Jack didn't take offense at the challenge in Zelkra's voice. In fact, it only reinforced the thoughts swirling in his head. He had a point to prove, but he wasn't here for arrogance or pride. He was here to show them what humanity could do. Zelkra gestured for the class to settle down, and the students fell into an uneasy silence. As we discuss the galactic politics and the evolution of war, I ask you humans, what does it mean to face true conflict? What can your species contribute to the greater galactic community? Jack, sitting among the humans, stood up. He knew this was his moment. The eyes of every alien in the room were now on him. Their stares varied. Some curious, some skeptical, and some mocking. But Jack wasn't intimidated. "It means surviving the odds," Jack began. His voice was steady, and despite the weight of the moment, there was a quiet strength in his tone. "You talk about war, Zelkra, but let me tell you about something on my planet. A creature that embodies what conflict truly means." A murmur ran through the class. Some of the aliens looked at each other, confused. What was this human going to say? Jack glanced at the display, his mind racing. He had to explain this, show them just how unprepared they were to understand the true nature of Earth's struggle. "It's called a shark," Jack said, his voice cutting through the silence. The room fell silent. Zelkra's brow furrowed, as did the others. The Tsarnothian leaned forward, his glowing orange eyes narrowing. "A shark?" "Yes," Jack replied, his eyes locking with the instructors. "On Earth, sharks are predators, and not just any predators. These creatures are apex hunters. They've existed for millions of years, long before humanity became anything like what we are now. They don't follow the rules of any species. They don't respect boundaries or prey. They are designed to kill. They strike when least expected, and when they do not show mercy." Zelkra crossed his arms, his voice dripping with skepticism. "You describe this shark as a predator, but surely there are predators on every world. What makes this one so special?" Jack's lips curled into a half-smile, though his eyes remained cold. "It's not about size or strength, Zelkra. It's about a predator that has evolved to survive in the most hostile environment possible, the ocean." Zelkra blinked. "The ocean?" Jack replied, now fully engaged in his explanation. "The ocean is a different kind of battlefield. The shark is the deadliest thing in that environment. And the worst part, the shark doesn't care if you're a bigger, stronger predator. It doesn't care if you're ready or if you're armed. It strikes when it senses weakness. And it doesn't stop until it gets what it wants." The aliens exchanged uneasy glances. The Zilfran instructor Ivla floated closer to Jack. "But surely humans must have learned to avoid these creatures? Or do you hunt them?" Jack shook his head. "No, we don't hunt them. At least not normally. You can't fight a shark in its own world. The ocean is theirs. We just have to avoid them. But even then, we're never truly safe. That's the thing about sharks. They remind you that nothing is ever certain. No matter how advanced you are, how prepared you think you are, they'll come for you when you least expect it." Jack's voice grew quiet as he continued. "You can't defeat them all, but you can learn to live with the fear, and eventually you learn something even more important. You learn how to adapt." The room was silent. Jack could see the looks of disbelief in the eyes of the alien students. They couldn't quite comprehend what he was saying. To them, danger was something to be faced head-on, something to be conquered with technology and strategy. But Jack was telling them something different, that true survival didn't just come from strength. It came from knowing your enemy, understanding the world you lived in, and adapting to the threats you couldn't avoid. Zelkra seemed less certain now. "And you, humans live with this danger?" Jack smiled faintly. "We don't just live with it. We embrace it. It's part of who we are. You think we're soft, that we're weak. But the truth is, we live in a world where every day could be our last, and we still survive." Zelkra took a moment, processing Jack's words. The Tsarnothian had never been one to underestimate anything. But the concept of facing dangers simply as part of life was something alien to him. "Perhaps I have underestimated your species," Zelkra said, his tone softer than before. "Perhaps you are not as weak as I once thought." Jack nodded, his expression calm but resolute. "We've never been weak. You just didn't know what it meant to be human." The class fell into silence, but now there was something different in the air. The alien students were no longer just looking at Jack. They were looking at each other, considering the implications of what he had said. They had come to the academy to teach the humans, but now perhaps they would be the ones who learned something truly unexpected. Jack's words had struck a chord. The silence that followed his explanation of the shark was palpable. It wasn't just the quiet of a class deep in thought. It was the silence of an entire room realizing that they were looking at something new, something they hadn't expected. He could feel the weight of the stares as every alien in the room considered what he had said. There was a palpable shift in their expressions, from skepticism to cautious curiosity, and even to something akin to respect. A moment ago they had looked at him as just another human, an insignificant and fragile species that had barely made its mark on the galactic stage. Now, he wasn't so sure that was the case. Zelkra, the imposing Tsarnothian instructor, seemed to ponder Jack's words for longer than Jack had expected. He stood still, his massive exoskeletal body unmoving, his eyes narrowing as he considered the implications. Jack couldn't tell if the Tsarnothian was impressed or just confused. In truth, Jack wasn't sure how anyone could grasp the full extent of what it meant to live on Earth without understanding the daily threats of its nature. The Tsarnothian's low voice eventually cut through the silence. "You speak of sharks as though they are more than just predators. Do you mean to say that they have shaped your civilization, your way of life?" Jack nodded, his mind racing with the implications of his own words. "You could say that. Not all of us have the same direct encounter with them, but the fear is there. It's ingrained in us. It's a reminder that no matter how much we advance, there are forces that we simply can't control. The ocean, with its sharks, teaches us about our own vulnerabilities, how small we are in the grand scheme of things." "Your world sounds like a Deathworlds," said Evlat, the Zilfrelfren instructor, her voice lilting with a hint of genuine curiosity. Her transparent body shimmered slightly as she spoke, and her many arms reached toward Jack, as though trying to physically grasp the depth of his words. "You make it sound like survival is just a choice." Jack turned to face her. "Exactly. We don't have the luxury of being soft, not when everything around us could kill us if we let our guard down for even a moment." Zelkra's posture shifted, though it was subtle. The Tsarnothian's large, segmented exoskeleton creaked as he crossed his arms, a sign that he was deep in thought. "Tell me more. I've heard of the dangers of your world, the stories of storms, wildfires, earthquakes, and all manner of chaotic forces. But you speak of this predator with an understanding of its dominance. Why is it so significant?" Jack paused, looking at the display in the center of the room, The galaxy's map shimmered before his eyes, filled with stars and planets. To most of the students here, Earth was just one more blue and green speck among 1,000, lost in a sea of more advanced civilizations. But to Jack, Earth was the fiercest and most unpredictable planet in existence. It was a world that, for all its beauty, could kill you on a new given day. Because it reminds us of our limits, Jack said quietly, his voice almost distant. We didn't conquer Earth. We learned to live with it. We adapted to its dangers. The alien students were quiet now, each of them trying to comprehend a concept they had never truly considered before. They had assumed that humanity's place in the stars was earned by its technology, by its intellect, by its rise above other species. But now Jack was telling them that it wasn't technology that made humans strong. Evla's multi-limbed form floated slightly closer to Jack, her translucent body glowing faintly. Tell me, human, have you ever faced one of these sharks yourself? Jack felt a knot form in his stomach at the thought. The memories were still fresh, despite the years. He had been a child when it happened, just another vacation with his family, a trip to the coast. They had been swimming near the shore when the alert went off. Jack's father had pulled him from the water just in time, the terror in his eyes something Jack would never forget. They had barely made it out. His father had always been the strong one, the protector, but even he had understood that in the ocean they were nothing. They were prey. Jack exhaled slowly, his eyes turning inward as he recalled the sensation of that day, the pounding of his heart in his chest. Yes, he said, his voice low. I've faced one. But that's not the point. It's not about confronting them head on. It's about knowing that danger exists and being able to live your life anyway. Zelker leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing as he studied Jack. The Tazarnothian was clearly trying to make sense of what he was hearing. So you say you face these creatures but do not fight them directly? You simply endure? Exactly, Jack replied. We don't have to defeat the shark to win. We have to learn how to live in a world where it's always waiting. That's the lesson. There was a long pause. Jack could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air. The aliens around him, some of them veterans of countless wars and battles, were now confronting a truth that was foreign to them. For all their strength and power, they had never had to live with the constant threat of death. They had the luxury of control. Earth did not. Zelker straightened his posture, the creaks of his exoskeleton louder this time. I must admit, human, your words are intriguing. You speak of survival not as an action but as a philosophy. This is different from how we think of strength. Jack nodded. It's a different kind of strength, and it's one we've had to rely on because it's the only way we could survive. The rest of the class was silent for a few moments, each student lost in thought. The Zilfra Yevla was the first to speak, her tone filled with quiet reverence. This shark, it is a symbol of the natural world's power over your species, and yet you do not surrender to it. Jack smiled faintly. We don't surrender. We endure. That's what makes us human. Zelker's expression shifted, a mixture of respect and contemplation in his eyes. This is fascinating. I will have to consider this in more detail. It seems I've underestimated your species. Jack stood tall. We've all been underestimated, Zelkra, but that's okay. We'll keep proving everyone wrong. The days following the class were filled with intense discussions, both in and outside the classroom. Jack's words had ignited something within the alien students. They started to ask him more questions, probing into humanity's history and its survival strategies. It wasn't long before Jack found himself surrounded by eager aliens who wanted to learn more about Earth's evolution, its wildlife, and how humans had risen to face the dangers of their planet. It was a stark contrast to the earlier mockery Jack had felt from them. Zelkro, for his part, seemed to have undergone a quiet transformation. The Tarnothian was no longer the dismissive instructor. He was now a seeker, trying to understand humanity in ways that he had never considered before. During the breaks between lectures, he would approach Jack, asking him about human history, culture, and the hidden dangers of Earth that no one outside their world could truly comprehend. One evening, after class had ended, Zelkra pulled Jack aside in the quiet hallway outside the lecture hall. The corridor was empty, bathed in the cool glow of artificial lights. "I have been thinking, human," the Tazarnothian said, his deep voice softer than usual. "What you told us about sharks, it was not just a story. It is a part of your survival, your way of life." Jack nodded. "That's right." Zelkra paused for a moment before continuing. "Tell me, Jack, do you think you could teach us how to adapt to such threats? How to survive when there is no way to defeat the enemy?" Jack raised an eyebrow, surprised by the question. "Teach you?" "Yes," Zelkra said, his voice steady but laced with a rare hint of humility. "We, the Tsarnothians, know how to fight and conquer, but we have never had to live with danger in the way you describe it. You say humans are not soft, but perhaps it is you who have learned the truest strength of all, survival against the impossible." Jack thought for a moment, his mind racing. He had never considered teaching anyone his survival philosophy, but then again he had never thought he'd find himself in the halls of an intergalactic academy, teaching beings who had seen wars and conquered entire planets. The idea of sharing Earth's harsh lessons with them seemed, strange, but somehow it felt right. "I don't know if I can teach you," Jack said slowly, "but I can show you. I can show you what it means to live in the shadow of something that could kill you at any moment and still stand tall." Zelkra nodded solemnly, his gaze fixed on Jack. "Then show us, human. Show us what true strength looks like." And in that moment, Jack knew that this journey, this discovery, was only just beginning. They had thought humans were soft, but now they would see the truth. Humans had survived the greatest of threats, and they had learned to live with it. It was a lesson they would never forget. The days following the lecture had been a whirlwind of activity. Jack had anticipated some level of curiosity from his fellow students after his explanation of the sharks, but he hadn't expected it to take on the momentum that it had. He spent his mornings attending the interstellar diplomacy classes, but it was during the afternoons that things got more interesting. His fellow students, many of whom were from species that had conquered vast stretches of space, started to approach him. They asked him questions, endless questions, about Earth and its dangerous wildlife, its struggles, and, of course, its predatory creatures. It was clear now that something fundamental had shifted. They saw him differently. No longer just a human among many, Jack had become a symbol, a bridge to understanding a different form of strength, one they hadn't fully grasped before. On the fourth day after his initial lecture, Jack found himself sitting in a circular room, surrounded by a dozen students of various species. The room was a part of the Federation Academy's training hall, a place for practical lessons, where students could test out their theories in controlled environments. The walls were lined with interactive holograms, simulations of alien worlds and survival scenarios, and data about the various species who inhabited them. Zelkra stood at the front of the room, his massive form filling the space with an air of authority. His normally unyielding demeanor had softened since Jack's lecture. There was a quiet intensity in his eyes now, as though he had been watching Jack for days, evaluating him. Beside him, a display projected images of different environments, harsh climates, extreme weather, and dangerous wildlife. Today was not going to be a typical lesson. Pretty weather, pretty girls. Water. Jack had expected that much. The Sarnothian instructor's voice echoed through the room as he spoke. Today we will conduct an exercise, one that will test your survival instincts. You will face dangers that have been programmed into the simulation, but you must approach them as you would in your home environments. Think of it as a way to understand your species' strategies, how you would overcome threats, and, most importantly, how you adapt. Jack stood up, his hands behind his back, eyes scanning the room. Some students seemed eager, others apprehensive. The alien species that populated the academy had never faced challenges like this before. The harsh unpredictability of Earth's environments was something they couldn't quite fathom. Zelkra turned his attention to Jack. Human, you will take the lead in this exercise. You will be responsible for guiding the class through Earth's most dangerous habitats. Show us how humans survive. Jack nodded, swallowing his nerves. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. They had asked for this. They wanted to learn. He glanced at the display, his mind already running through the options in front of him. There were many dangerous scenarios on Earth. Volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, wildfires. But there was one that stood above the rest in terms of sheer terror. The ocean. The holographic display shifted, showing an image of a vast, turbulent sea. Dark waves crashing against jagged rocks. The sky a stormy gray, thunder echoing across the horizon. It was an environment that epitomized the chaos of Earth, the unpredictability that defined the planet's harshest conditions. Jack addressed the group. This is where it starts. The ocean is the most dangerous, unpredictable environment on Earth. It's where sharks reign supreme. The alien students looked at the projection, some squinting as they took in the sight. They couldn't see it the way Jack did, couldn't feel the overwhelming danger that lurked beneath the surface of the water, but Jack was determined to show them. Humans don't just survive the ocean, Jack continued, his voice firm. We respect it. We don't fight it directly. We avoid the creatures that can kill us, adapt to the harsh conditions, and learn to live in its shadow. Zelkra's eyes flickered with interest, and Ivle, the Zilfra, tilted her head slightly, her translucent arms curling in thought. But it was the young Sarnothian student in the back who spoke up, his voice filled with confusion. You mean you don't fight? You let the sharks dominate the ocean? Jack turned to face him, meeting the young student's gaze with steady resolve. It's not about dominance. It's about understanding that in some battles there is no winner. The shark doesn't care about who's stronger. It doesn't care about rules. It's simply doing what it was born to do. What matters is how you learn to live in its world. The room fell silent, the weight of Jack's words settling in the air. It was difficult for them to understand this concept. Every one of the species present had mastered their environments, using strength or technology to conquer what stood in their way. The idea that humans simply existed alongside danger without fighting it was foreign to them. Yet, there was a quiet respect for the bravery it took to endure such threats. Jack's voice softened as he continued. The ocean teaches us to be humble. The creatures in it, like the shark, remind us that no matter how advanced we get, there are forces that we cannot control. So we learn to adapt. We learn to live with them, not against them. Zelkra stepped forward, the sound of his exoskeleton scraping against the floor reverberating in the room. Let us test this theory. We will enter the simulation, Show us how you would guide your people through this environment." Jack nodded once, his mind now fully focused on the task ahead. He gestured for the students to step forward, each of them preparing to enter the simulation. The holographic environment shifted once more, and the vast ocean came to life. The winds howled, and the waves surged in tumultuous motions. Dark shapes lurked beneath the surface, their shadows moving with ominous purpose. The ocean was alive with threats. "Step carefully," Jack warned, his voice sharp. "The sea is never forgiving. Keep your wits about you." As the students entered the simulation, they found themselves standing on a rocky outcrop, the sea crashing violently against the rocks below. The smell of salt water filled the air, and the sound of the storm was deafening. For a moment the students stood frozen, unable to comprehend the sheer scale of the danger around them. This was no peaceful beach, no calm ocean. This was an environment that could turn deadly at a moment's notice. "Stay close," Jack instructed, stepping forward into the churning waves. The holographic water lapped at his boots, cold and unnervingly real. In the ocean, you're never truly safe. Even on solid ground, you're vulnerable. The waves, the tides, they can pull you under. Watch your footing. The students followed, their movements cautious. As they advanced, Jack noticed the nervous energy emanating from them. They were out of their element, literally. The Zilfrans hovered with a slight unease, their translucent bodies shimmering with uncertainty. The Tsarnothians, normally so assured, looked unsure of themselves, their gaze shifting between the crashing waves and Jack. At that moment, a shadow swept beneath the surface of the water, moving with unnatural speed. Jack's heart rate quickened. He had prepared for this. "Look out!" he shouted, motioning for the group to scatter. The students didn't need any further instruction. Instinct took over. The Tsarnothian warriors reached for their weapons, their armored exoskeletons clicking as they prepared to fight. The Zilfrans began to float above the water, their bodies shimmering with energy. They were ready to defend themselves. But they didn't realize that no weapon would save them here. The shadow beneath the surface swirled again, and suddenly the figure of a massive shark burst from the water, its rows of jagged teeth gleaming in the dim light. The creature lunged toward them, moving with predatory precision. "This is what I mean," Jack shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "You don't fight it, you don't stand and face it, you avoid it, keep moving." As the shark's jaws snapped shut just inches from the students, they realized the gravity of the situation. The Tsarnothians, with their advanced weaponry, could have fought back, but they quickly understood that this wasn't a battle they could win. The Zilfrans, with their energy manipulation, could have attempted to fight the predator, but it would only have slowed it. Instead, the students listened to Jack. They followed his lead, retreating toward higher ground. The shark, relentless and single-minded in its pursuit, circled them once more before disappearing beneath the waves, its shadowy form retreating back into the depths. Zelkra, still standing on the rocks, was silent for a moment, taking in the experience. "You were right," he finally said, his voice low. "You do not fight this predator, you simply survive." Jack nodded, his expression serious. "That's the point, you adapt. You don't always win, you don't always get to conquer, but you live." The simulation shifted, the ocean calming and the shark vanishing into nothingness. The group was left standing on the rocks, their breaths heavy from the exertion. They had all just experienced the raw power of Earth's oceans, and in that moment, they understood something they hadn't before. Jack had shown them that survival wasn't always about fighting back. Sometimes, it was about knowing when to retreat, when to adapt, and when to live with the forces that were too great to challenge. As the holographic environment faded, Zelkra stepped forward, his massive form casting a long shadow. "Human," he said, his voice thoughtful. "I see now. Your species does not conquer through sheer force, but through perseverance, through adaptability." Jack met his gaze. "That's right. And that's why humans have made it this far. We don't give up, even when we're facing things we can't fight." Zelkra paused for a moment, as though weighing Jack's words carefully. "Perhaps, then, humanity is not as soft as we once thought." Jack smiled slightly, his eyes meeting those of the other students. "I'm glad we could show you." And in that moment, Jack knew that the galaxy had just learned a very important lesson about humanity. It wasn't about strength, technology, or might. It was about something deeper. It was about survival against the odds. And that was something the galaxy would never forget.